hours for work, 8 for sleep, 8 for what they called living. That was the dream of the 19th century labor movements, and on paper, it's still the model today. But here's the thing. The 40-hour work week wasn't designed for you. Not for me either. Not for the single mother. Not for the burned out creative freelancer. Not for a queer couple trying to split the mental load evenly. Not for a man who wants to be present for his kids and not just at their bedtime. It was built for him, the breadwinner. The guy with a wife at home cooking, cleaning, raising the children, and staying invisible in the labor laws. She is not in the textbooks, but she is in every assumption the system makes. Today, most households are dual income. Most of us don't have a partner at home doing everything else. And yet, we still work like it's 1952. In this episode, I want to take you inside that story. We are going to unpick the myth of the standard work week, where it came from, who was it built for, and what it costs to all of us to keep pretending it still is the working system. No wonder we're exhausted. No wonder we feel broken for not keeping up. No wonder we're starting to ask better questions. Before we dive in, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like feminism is this huge confusing topic where you don't really know where you fit? If this hits home, you're exactly in the right place. Hit subscribe so you don't miss another conversation where we break down those walls and we find our path together. Welcome to No Wonder, and today, as you probably imagined, we're discussing the topic of the 40-hour work week. So the question that we will trying to answer sounds something like, was the 40-hour work week designed for men with a housewife? I feel like it's a bit of a burning question in today's economy, in today's situation. I feel like with my peers and my colleagues is a question that came up in different conversations. So I would like to unpick it with you and see what the sources and the media says about this topic. So the 40-hour work week is typically represented by a 5-day, 8 hours a day standard type of framework. And it was established in the early 20th century. And it was a significant labor reform. So this is the first topic we're going to highlight. The frequent claim, however, is that the model was built around the assumption of a male breadwinner with a spouse, usually a wife, who would manage household duties and childcare. From now on, we will see a few sources and a few perspectives on this argument that, of course, you will find linked below in the caption and in the description. The origin of the labor reform is the 40-hour work week was actually a reduction of the standard work week of the time. The workers emerged from long struggles by labor movements against far longer hours, with the 8-hour day movement tracing back even to the 19th century. So we're seeing even before the 20th century, there were movements mentioning a shorter work week demand. Early formulations did not specifically reference gender, but economic and social contexts were deeply gendered. So that's another footnote that needs to stay in your brain. The implementation of the 40-hour work week came then with Henry Ford, who was pivotal in popularizing the 40 hours in the United States. And this happened in the 1920s. And he saw this as a mean to improve productivity and worker satisfaction, but it was again not specifically linked to gender. So how did we arrive to mentioning gender in this whole evolution? There are some cultural assumptions coming in play, which is that social expectations during the time of the 40-hour work week revolution, it was codified and presumed with a division of labor between men, the paid work, and women, the unpaid domestic work. And many sources and commentators suggest that the work week structure reflected the society at the time with the male breadwinner and a wife he could rely on. For example, there is a well-cited discussion on Reddit, Ask Historians, that points out that while homemakers did contribute to the feasibility of the 40-hour week, the primary motives stayed and remained the productivity and the labor management. However, it is historically presumed that most individuals had partners to handle domestic tasks, because that was the prevailing social model of the single income household. The critiques of the current work patterns trace the roots to this mismatch, as the now dual income families, without supporting domestic labor, struggle with the original structure. It is important to remember that there is, in the 20th century, the concept of family wage, and it's the idea that one man's full-time wage should support the entire family. And this underlines the design of many labor policies, reinforcing the breadwinner and homemaker. And as more women entered the paid labor and dual income household, this became the norm. The inadequacy and the strain on the 40-hour standards for family without a full-time homemaker became more apparent with time, fueling the contemporary debates over work-life balance. I would like to bring just a couple of academic and social science perspectives. So the first is a couple of sociological commentaries that there are studies that highlight that when both parents work full-time schedules, which is the opposite of the original idea of having a one non-working spouse, family stress and gender inequality in household chores rise significantly. In mid-20th century America, for example, a married man's success often depended on the wife's unpaid labor supporting his career at home. So we should have a nuanced reading of this whole story, because the 40-hour work week was not designed for men with housewife. It was built into a system reinforced by societal structure around these gender roles. And the reduction in hours was a response to an exploitative system and just dovetailed the family system that was already in place and did not challenge it. Also, early labor reforms did not foresee the dual-income household as the dominant norm. When more and more women began entering the workforce, the existing structure are now starting to be challenged. So, from this point on, we have understood the history behind how the 40-hour work week was actually an improvement in workers' condition. But when I was writing the episode and then the bullet points for this episode, the question that came to mind now was, how did we, as a society, morally transition from craving, quote-unquote, the 40-hour work week to actually despise it and want to get rid of it? To begin this analysis, I would like to bring you then the consequences of the 40-hour work week in today's world. There are a few categories of consequences that we're going to be looking at, varying from societal point of view, psychological point of view, and health point of view. So, first we have to evaluate the mismatch of the modern family structure. Because when the 40-hour work week was established, the prevailing model assumed one breadwinner and a full-time spouse handling domestic labor. However, in today's world, this no longer applies for families. In today's economy, it is very hard for a single-income household to live with the standards that they want to. And so we are seeing that most families nowadays are dual income, which means that both parents work full-time and they still must manage all the domestic responsibility on their free time. And this is shown in studies that leads to heightened work-family conflict, particularly for women who still shoulder disproportionate share of unpaid labor. The second type of family that I would like to mention is single-parent families who do not have a partner to share household and childcare responsibilities. And they face even more acute challenges with this rigid 40-hour work schedule. Secondly, there are gender consequences and inequality that arise from the structure. And this is called the second shift. Let me explain better. Women working over 40 hours per week are more likely to report insufficient time for personal care and leisure, and they face higher risk of overweight and obesity. Because household responsibilities are unevenly distributed still today, women more often experience the second shift that I was mentioning, which is working a full-time job and doing most of the domestic work at home. This leads, of course, to increased stress and negative health outcomes. Another gender issue that rises is career advancement limitations. It is shown in statistics that expectations of working longer hours and inflexible schedules reduce a woman's access to top roles, especially if they are the primary caregivers in the household. And this then perpetuates the gender wage gap and inhibits upwards mobility. The third point is work-life balance and wellness. Another consequence is a higher risk of burnout, because the 40-hour work week promotes lower job satisfaction, which increases rates of burnout, mental and physical health problems. The constant pressure of meet work demands often means sacrificing personal family time. There is also an impact on relationships. Overwork is common in today's workforce and is linked to higher perceived stress, reduced time adequacy with the partner, and lower relationship quality. These effects are more pronounced when both partners are working long hours. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the infamous productivity and job satisfaction that these 40 hours were introduced for. Unfortunately, there are evidences of diminishing returns in productivity in today's day and age, because these longer hours do not necessarily correlate with greater productivity anymore. Prolonged work weeks can decrease focus, increase human error, and lead to disengagement and lower morale. This also brought out a desire for flexibility, as many workers feel stifled by a fixed 9-to-5 schedule. Flexibility in hours and the ability of managing own schedule is frequently cited as desirable traits for modern workplaces, leading to greater job satisfaction and potentially better results. I would like to play a little bit the devil's advocate here, because this desire for flexibility, where is actually coming from? And this is a question I would like to ask you, my audience, to answer for yourself. I recently listened to a podcast, and one of the guests were mentioning that our society is always wanting more, coming from a capitalistic view. Capitalism gave us everything and then made us wanting more. So is this desire for flexibility only coming because we are tired of working so hard? Or is it a negative externality of capitalism? Well, positive, depending where you're looking it for. But from the point of view of capitalism, is it a negative externality that capitalism gave us so much that now we want even more? We want more time to do the things that capitalism gave us. I don't know if this question makes sense, you let me know, but I think it's a relevant point. Moving on, I would like to mention the impact on childcare and community. I feel like patient support for working parents is a problem in our community nowadays. They say it takes a village to grow a child, and we're barely two people together. And this lack of flexibility forces many parents to make challenging and costly childcare arrangements, contributing to family stress and, in some cases, reducing labor force participation rates for parents. And you guessed it, it's mostly mothers. And on this point, I would like to have another intervention, because I feel like the higher costs that are mentioned in this paragraph are monetary or not. Because a couple who is dual income, yes, it makes more money, and yes, it can afford childcare. But at one point, it's going to seem like I am paying for an expensive childcare for keeping my child so that I can work more to make money to pay for said childcare. Shouldn't I just stay at home? Food for thoughts. And another point on the impact of this lack of community is, what are the effects on children? I didn't find any sources that mention impact on children. It's just a thought that came to my head but maybe it's worth looking into more. The community involvement is also a point, because the rigid work schedule limits participation in community, civic or volunteer activities, which depends on the availability of the working age adults outside the standard work hours. And I feel it's also important to mention this point, although I didn't, unfortunately, look into it too much into detail. There is a disproportionate impact on marginalized groups. The stress of balancing full-time work with domestic duties is magnified for racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ+ employees, and other marginalized groups who may have less access to supportive resources and who face additional workplace challenges. So, in today's world, the legacy of a work week is designed by a bygone family structure that inflicts substantial and often hidden costs for families, women, and society at large. Calls for systemic change are mounting as evidence grows, and flexibility, reduced hours, and gender equality are not longer just desirable but necessary for the modern well-being and economic productivity. We mentioned the bygone family structure, but do we have a bygone workforce? Do we have a bygone economic system? Do we have bygone social structures? Are we ready as a society for a different workforce, different workplaces, different structures? So you know that I have to play a little bit the devil's advocate, and the next section is going to be what's happening to mend this problem. And I would like to mention that since this problem does not affect solely women, but also men, society is looking at this problem with a more speedy attitude and with more interests. Was that out of place? Probably. But there are solutions that are being explored and studied, and I will bring forward a couple of them for your interest. So, to resume, the issue is that there are economic pressures with stagnant wages. So, despite the overall increased productivity, wages have not kept pace with the rising cost of living, particularly housing, making it increasingly difficult for a single income to support family, which is a core expectation of the 40-hour work week when it was implemented. And there are evolving societal values on the future of work. Younger generation are actively questioning and redefining traditional work norms, prioritizing work-life balance, mental health, and more egalitarian gender roles. Also, it's important to mention that the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the discussion around remote work and flexible schedules, highlighting that work should be about results and not hours. So there are 4 types of different approaches of the 40-hour work week that we're going to see today. The first one being reduced week or reduced hours. The 4-day work week is one of the most popularized in the discussion now, as the society is actively exploring and experimenting with these various alternatives. The model of the 4-day work week, which is either 32 hours or 40 hours in 4 days, is a model that typically involves working 4 days instead of 5, with the total of either reduced 32 hours, 4 hours, 8 days, or compressed 40 hours in 10 hours days. What are the effectiveness and the benefits? Has this been tested? Yes. I found 3 studies on the subject, 2 of them in Europe and 1 in Japan. There is evidence of improved well-being and work balance. Studies in Iceland show that the 35 to 36 hours work week with no pay reduction led to less stress for the employees and more family time. Participants in a Belgian trial of the 30-hour work week, down for 36, experienced a significant decrease in work-family conflicts, partly due to increased schedule control, satisfaction, and work pressure, and sufficient perceived free time. There is also a study that shows increased productivity with reducing hours. Experiments like in Microsoft Japan 4-day workweek trial in 2019 reported that 40% increase in productivity and greater employee satisfaction. The idea behind it is that with limited amount of time, workers prioritize and do better work more efficiently. A survey found that 77% of workers reported increased productivity with 4 days a week, and 97% believed that they would be more productive. There is also a point to be made with higher employee satisfaction and retention, because longer weekends lead to more personal time, which motivates employees and can boost happiness levels. A significant majority, 58% of the employees, would choose a 4-day a week over a pay raise, for example. Little note, there's also reduced commuting, which is always good. However, there are some downsides that need to be noted, because especially the 10-hour-a-day version can lead to exhaustion with compressed hours, because 10 hours can be mentally and physically exhausting for some employees. And this could potentially hinder the productivity that was mentioned before. Some companies are mentioning that 32-hour work week wouldn't be enough time for some jobs or companies who need to for the employees to complete the necessary work, and this could potentially cause more stress and time pressure. Finally, they are foreseeing coordination difficulties, coordinating all of these schedules across departments, or if you are in a more customer-focused industry, it can be challenging if all the employees have different time offs. The second type of arrangement is a flexible schedule. This allows employees to choose their own working hours within a set time frame, including determining start and end times, or even working remotely. The benefits are, of course, the customization and work-life balance, as you can imagine. Flexi time is highly customizable to individual needs. And this can accommodate for personal obligations like children or doctor appointments or pursuing education. This is also empowering for employees to align their work hours with their personal life, improving balance and reduce stress. This also leads, as you can imagine, to increase autonomy, which by itself leads to job satisfaction. Because empowering employees to determine their own schedule leads to higher job satisfaction. And the control over the daily working hours has significant impact on their well-being. Finally, if they feel better, they work better. So improved productivity is in the picture. Individuals may be more productive when they work during their own peak times of the day, not one dictated by the company. The challenges and the drawback, of course, come back to some of that we already mentioned. So scheduling conflicts. Diverse schedule can make it difficult to book meetings or coordinate collaborative efforts. And of course, it's trickier management because it may become more challenging for managers to understand what employees are working on. Point number 3, it's now what we consider an old friend, or at least I do, it's remote work. Employees work from location outside traditional offices and often from home. The trend was accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why I say it's an old friend. I'm not going to be too long on this one because we all know it, we all experienced it, more or less. So there is flexibility and convenience. Companies also have access to global talent. And many employees found that they could be just as or more productive working from home without office distractions. There are challenges with remote work, mostly being the blurred boundaries and burnout, because it can be difficult for employees to disconnect and separate work from personal life, leading to a sense of being perpetually on the clock and increased burnout rates. A report noted that 22% of remote workers struggle with unplugging after work. Another point of the challenges and drawbacks of remote work is social isolation, because it leads to less direct interactions that can affect a team cohesion and communication. And the last, but definitely not the least point, is the result-only work environment. ROWE. This is, I think, the more futuristic one in a sense, because let me describe it to you. Employees are free to work wherever and whenever they want, as long as they deliver the result. The focus shifts entirely from time spent to outcomes achieved. The effectiveness and the benefits of this include that companies implementing result-driven work environments report double-digit gains in employee engagement and productivity. This model aligns with the idea that the quality of the ideas, the clarity of vision, and the execution matter most, rather than just the time spent on doing it. So we're seeing a shift toward these new alternatives now, which is driven by the realization that the longer hours do not necessarily equate with greater productivity, and that the traditional 40-hour work week often leads to burnout and poor work-life balance, especially for the now most large type of family, the dual-income household. The 40 hours week was designed in a different societal context where the spouse, typically a woman, was often at home. And the COVID-19 pandemic particularly highlighted the need to rethink work arrangements, prompting discussion about flexible and reduced working hours. But now, you know that I need to make this tangible and I need to make this pragmatic. So I'm now speaking to you, my listener, who maybe you feel confused or overwhelmed by the discrepancies in the 40-hour work week, especially when you're trying in your life to be thoughtful and socially conscious. Rest assured, many people share these feelings, and this is a sign of a system that is still catching up on modern realities. You're definitely not alone in recognizing this mismatch. So let's break down both the philosophical context and some practical actionable insights, drawing on what the sources tell us to help us navigate this in our own terms. So, I mentioned philosophical discrepancies because when I was writing this episode, I was feeling pulled on the different directions of the 40-hour work week was actually a reform, so we should be happy about it. But then there's the companies who also need their work to be done, especially we're seeing SMEs. And then I was thinking about myself and how maybe 40 hours is too much. So I've written everything down. Let's go into it. The 40-hour work week, typically set as 8 hours a day, as we saw, was a revolutionary achievement, as we mentioned, of the labor movement in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Workers previously were facing grueling schedules from 10 or 16 hours a day, often 6 days a week, and that included child labor. The slogan 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest became a really strong cry for shorter hours. Henry Ford played a pivotal role in popularizing the 40-hour work week in the US, and his motivation was not about gender roles, as we saw. It was just a shrewd business decision aimed to improve productivity. He believed that well-rested workers would be more efficient and, importantly, they would have time and money to purchase the products that they produced. Capitalism, remember? However, the philosophical discrepancy here is that there is an implicit societal context of that era. The early formulation of the 8-hour day didn't mention gender, again as we saw, but the economic and social contexts were deeply gendered. And the prevailing social model presumed a male breadwinner whose full-time wage would support the entire family, and that the spouse, typically the wife, was the one he could rely on for domestic work and unpaid household and care tasks. Oh, note this one. Domestic employees were even explicitly excluded from early labor protections like minimum wage until much later, and they were often Black or Latinos women working the rock bottom wages. And today, the historical assumptions clashes with reality because most families are dual-income households. For example, 7 out of 10 mothers now engage in paid work, and the division of household labor has been very slow to change, meaning that women still today often shoulder the second shift that we mentioned. This creates work-family conflict, stress, burnout, and negative health outcomes for especially women. So yes, the 40-hour work week, while an improvement, historically, has now become outdated and toxic for modern families without a full-time homemaker. Now, to finish off really quickly, I would like to bring to you actionable insights to better handle, personally and socially, the 40-hour work week discrepancies. First of all, how do we navigate this in our personal life, prioritizing our well-being? The first step is the one that you've already taken today listening to this podcast, is that you have to be aware of the system. Because feeling of being constantly tired, overwhelmed, or unable to do it all is not just a personal failing, but it is the result of a work model that hasn't adapted to today's family structures. This understanding can help alleviate the anxiety and the self-judgment that you're feeling. The second point is to listen to your body and mind. You have to recognize that working long hours is linked to burnout, stress, and decreased productivity, and overall poorer mental and physical health. Please prioritize your well-being, which is paramount. The second points are around actively managing your time and energy. Prioritize sufficient free time. Subjective matters. Here I'm going to bring to you a concept that when I read about it was very interesting, and I hope I can get the message across. Because research suggests that the feeling of having enough free time, subjective sufficiency, is a significant factor in general well-being, even more than the actual hours spent on leisure. This means that even if your leisure time is limited, finding ways to make it feel adequate can be enough to make it beneficial. Secondly, it's important to set clear boundaries, because blurring the lines between work and personal life is not going to cut it. Establish clear guidelines for when you're available for work communications or not, and encourage yourself to disconnect during personal time. When you're working, focus on impact and not just hours, because studies have shown that working smarter and not just longer leads to better outcomes, because many productive countries now have shorter average work weeks. Learn time management techniques like time blocking or the Pomodoro technique, and avoid multitasking to maximize efficiency with working hours. Lastly, in the personal life, seek flexibility where possible. Understand that schedule control is a protective factor because it can help significantly reduce work-family conflict and improve job-related well-being. If your workplace offers flexible arrangements, consider exploiting them. Also, if it's possible, explore alternative work models. Many companies now are experimenting with adopting alternatives like the 4-day workweek that we saw, or the compressed work weeks, or the flexible schedules. Understanding these options can empower you in your future job searches or your internal discussions. Now, you would like to be part of a broader change. What can you do? If you want to make an impact on your own terms, what can you do? You can engage in informed dialogue and community, mainly by sharing your experience and listening to others. Because participating in the conversations that are existing now, sharing your experiences, or simply acknowledging the other people's struggle can help build a supportive community and normalize these feelings. When you can, challenge the antiquated gender norms at home in your private life. Because there are sources who highlight that the continued expectations of women of doing the majority of domestic childcare and work is a major factor in the perpetuation of the 40-hour discrepancy. If applicable to you, advocate for more equitable division of the labor within your household. This is a direct way to address the second shift burden that we mentioned. Lastly, you can understand and advocate for policy reforms. This means mostly going to vote or become an active citizen in policy reforms making if you're into it. You can support comprehensive paid leave, for example, or advocate for quality part-time work, or promote worker control and predictability. You can also look at global examples and collective action, because you can learn from the success stories that we've seen today. Iceland, Spain, Germany, Japan, and other Nordic countries have successfully trialed or implemented shorter work weeks, demonstrating that there is improved well-being and sustained productivity in these changes. These are real examples that can provide evidence of why change is possible and beneficial. Now that we understood the historical roots of the 40-hour work week and the unintended consequences in today's world, you can make your informed choices and your own decision on your well-being. And if you want to, you can contribute to more equitable future work, all on your terms.
If today's talk hit something inside, then that's exactly why you should subscribe. Every episode is here to support you, unfiltered, real, and raw. And if you know someone who's on the same path, you should share this episode with them, because from now on, they no longer have to figure this out alone.
So, what are we really clocking in for? If the 40-hour work week was built on the back of the silent partner, a woman with a mop in one hand and a child on her hip, then today we are still showing up for a system that never updated its user manual. We are burning out while we are trying to fix a structure that was never built with us, all of us in mind. Here's the twist. What started as a victory became a velvet cage. What was once freedom from exploitation now feels like a polished relic from a museum of misplaced priorities. And if you ever felt like you're failing because you can't do it all, let me tell you, you're not broken. The system is just outdated. You're not too sensitive. The hours are too long. You're not lazy. The expectations are misaligned with reality, especially if you're a woman, a caregiver, or just a dreamer with a nervous system. And you're not a built-in housewife. So what now? Maybe it's the time to stop trying to squeeze modern lives into antique frameworks. Maybe rest isn't a luxury, but it's a birthright. Maybe ambition doesn't have to wear a blazer and sit at a desk for 8 hours to be real. This is no wonder, where we pour the truth neat and untangle the knots in the stories we've been sold. Until next time, rest when you can, rage when you must. And if your job ever makes you feel like you are the problem, call in sick and come hang with us. You're not alone. Good night.